Yes, so can you all hear me and then see the slide?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I think we were discussing about photodetectors, and these photodetectors are used as optical receivers in an optical communication system. So the basic principle of photodetector is that when you have an incoming photon whose energy is, let's say, h nu, the energy is h nu, and if this energy is greater than the band gap of the semiconductor material, this photon would be absorbed by the semiconductor material inside the depletion region, and as a result, this would generate electrons and holes. You call them as photo-generated carriers. So these electrons and holes generated because of light absorption is called as photo-generated carriers. Photo-generated carriers. Now these carriers, these electrons and holes, need to be collected through an external circuit. So here you have a load resistor, and the generated electrons and holes will have to be collected, will have to be allowed to pass through this resistor, which would create a voltage drop, and you can measure this voltage, and this voltage V out would be proportional to the, would be directly proportional to the information signal what you receive. So to ensure that the electrons and holes are separated and are collected by the external circuit, we always use a reverse bias voltage. So this reverse bias voltage would ensure that there is a very strong electric field in the depletion region, which would cause the separation of electrons and holes. So these electrons and holes flows through the external circuit, resulting in a photocurrent, and that photocurrent would result in a voltage drop across the load resistor. And by measuring that voltage drop, or if you measure that photocurrent, you can actually demodulate what is the information signal what you have sent. So a photodiode or a photodetector is nothing but a reverse bias PN diode. So you know that in a reverse bias PN diode, if you look at the current expression, so I is given as I naught exponential QV by KT minus 1. So if V is negative, then this current I becomes approximately equal to I naught. That means the current that is flowing through a reverse bias PN diode is nothing but the reverse saturation current. So even when no photons are falling on the PN diode, you would see that there is a very small current that is flowing through the external circuit. So that current is what is called as the dark current. The dark current is actually a noise, because ideally we would expect that if no photons are falling on the diode, or if no photons are falling on the photoreceiver, you expect no output current. But in practice, you would see that there is a current that is flowing through. That current is a noise and is called as the dark current. It's also called as the dark current noise or dark noise. It's also called as dark noise. So this is it's actually an unwanted phenomenon. So if you want to minimize dark noise, you'll have to design a diode which has a very good IV characteristics. So that means the diode should be having extremely small reverse saturation current. So you have incoming photons, or you have light that is falling on this, photodetector. So to ensure that whatever light is falling on the photodetector is not reflected back, to maximize light absorption, we generally use anti-reflection coatings at the outermost layer of this photodiode. So light is coming in this way, it's coming in this direction. So the light falls here, but before it strikes the diode or the semiconductor material, we generally put a layer, an additional layer, which is called as the anti-reflection coating. So this anti-reflection coating would ensure that the reflection for a particular wavelength, let's say lambda or lambda g, if you assume that this is the wavelength of light that is falling, we would design this anti-reflection coating in such a way that the back reflection is minimized for lambda g. So you don't want any photon to reflect back, because if it is reflected back, it's not going to be absorbed by the photodiode, and therefore If it is not absorbed, then this output voltage also will be decreased. So this is how the PN this is how a normal PN diode photodetector works. So you have a PN, you have a P plus region, and then you have an N region. The reason why we make this P plus is because you know that in most of the semiconductors, semiconductor materials, you know that these electrons and holes, when they are generated here, these electrons and holes will be moving apart by a transport phenomena called as drift, which we have studied long back. So drift phenomena. Drift is the way by which these electrons and holes are getting separated. So each of these electrons and holes, they have a particular mobility. So electron has a mobility mu E and hole has a mobility mu H. It turns out that in most of the semiconductors, mu E is greater than mu H. Usually mu E is greater than mu H. That means electron travels faster compared to hole. So hole always travels slower. And the the carriers are always collected by the electrodes. So if you are placing an electrode which is far away from the depletion region, then it takes longer for the carriers to reach that electrode. So if you look here, you would see that this electrode, this contact electrode, is closer to the hole than with the electron. So that means, so the reason is because the reason why the hole is made, the hole is actually, the P plus region is made very close to the P plus region is made very close to the metal electrode is because
Sir,
the hole, yeah.
So can you start the recording?
Why whatever I just spoke was not audible to you?
It was no, sir. Audible, actually, sir, like recording.
Can you?
Recording is on.
Sir, it is not showing.
Yeah, if I think maybe Shijit or somebody would be recording it, and he'll be sharing it with all of you. So Shijit, is the recording on? Yeah, then it's okay. I don't know. I have no controls to. I don't know how I can control that.
Yes, now it is on.
Okay. So the holes have a smaller mobility. That means holes travel slower. So therefore, you would always want the hole to reach. You want the hole to travel a smaller distance before reaching the electrode. That's why you make this one closer, and also you make this P region very thin, whereas this N region is made thick. The reason is because in the difference in the electron and the hole mobilities. So that's how a PN photodetector works. Now, for a photodetector, there are mainly two. In fact, there are mainly two parameters which can decide the performance of a photodetector. One is called as the quantum efficiency, which is defined as the ratio between the number of useful electron-hole pairs what you generate divided by the total number of photons that are falling per unit time. So that is called as the quantum efficiency. And the responsivity is given by the ratio between the photocurrent what you generate to the optical power that is falling on it. So remember, photodiode is a device which converts light to electricity, just like the solar cell. Solar cell also does the same function, but the difference is that in the case of photodetector, you are more interested in a very small range of frequencies or very small range of wavelengths. Whereas in the case of solar cell, you want to capture all the photons that are being emitted by the sun. So if you look at the quantum efficiency, if you want to calculate the number of electron-hole pairs that are generated, then that the number of electron-hole pairs that are generated is given by the photocurrent, the current that is flowing through the current that is produced divided by the charge of the electron. So that would give you. So this would give you the number of electrons. So this would give you the number of electrons. whereas the number of incident photons per unit time. So this is given by, or this is also, in other words, this is also the optical power. So the number of incident photons per unit time is given by the optical power divided by the energy of the individual photon. So you take this ratio, this is the dimensionless number, and therefore this is what is called as the quantum efficiency. And the responsivity of a photodiode is given by the photocurrent, the current what you produce, divided by the total optical power that is falling on it. So if you so using these two expressions, you can rewrite the quantum efficiency as, the responsivity as the quantum efficiency multiplied by the charge of the electron multiplied by the wavelength of the photon divided by the Planck's constant and the wavelength, the speed of the light. So, so if you plot the responsivity, of the photodiode as a function of wavelength, you would see that, so according to this equation, you can see that responsivity is proportional to lambda. So you might expect that if you increase lambda, responsivity would also increase linearly. But you will see that in practice, you will see that it increases, but then it does not respond beyond a certain wavelength. It does not respond beyond a certain wavelength. That wavelength is what is called as the cutoff wavelength, or probably critical wavelength. You can define it in various ways. So can you explain why this is so? Why does the photodetector does not respond beyond a certain wavelength? So why is it so?
As wavelength increases, the energy will decrease, so it will not be able to generate electron hole pair.
So it's all because of the band gap. So please note that the basic principle of operation is, you know that in the semiconductor you have conduction band and valence band. So when you have an incoming photon, and let's assume that the band gap energy is Eg. So if you have an incoming photon whose energy is equal to or greater than Eg, only then this photon, the incoming photon, will be absorbed by an electron. This electron will go up, and so you create an electron and you create a hole, or in other words, you create an electron hole pair. However, if the wavelength of the light is larger, which means the energy is smaller, if the incoming photon energy is smaller than the band gap, then this photon will not be able to lift an electron from valence band to conduction band. So any photons whose energy is smaller than the band gap will not be able to create any responsivity, will not be able to generate any electron hole pairs inside that photodetector. And that's why you see that it does not respond beyond a critical wavelength. Now there are different kinds of photodiode. The most simpler one we have seen before, it's called as a photoconductor, which works on the principle of electron hole pair generation for a simple piece of semiconductor material. So this was improved to make PN photodetector. However, PN photodetector also has certain drawbacks. It has certain drawbacks. The drawback is that, so if you have if you want to detect signals with very high modulation frequencies, then because of the depletion capacitance, you know that the capacitance of a diode is given by epsilon naught epsilon r A divided by D, where D is the width of the depletion region. So if the width of the depletion region is small, then the capacitance is going to be large. And if the capacitance of the device is larger, the device is going to respond only slowly. So which means that higher frequency signals cannot be used. I mean, you cannot use a normal PN diode for detecting high frequency signals. So to ensure that the high frequency signals can be detected, you need to reduce the depletion capacitance, which can be done by increasing the depletion width. And how do you increase the depletion width of a PN diode? You add an additional layer called as the I layer or the intrinsic layer. So, so you have P plus, and then you have N plus here. So you have a P region and an N region. In between, you use an intrinsic region. So this intrinsic region, this very thick intrinsic region does two functions. One is that it can minimize the device capacitance. The other is that this is the region where it's the intrinsic region where the electrons and holes are generated, or in other words, this is the region where the light is usually absorbed. So therefore, if you have a larger intrinsic region, it can absorb more light. So in that way, so these are the two advantages of PIN photodetector. However, the disadvantage is that the speed is going to be affected, because let's say that you create an electron and a hole. This electron and hole that is generated inside will not be detected as long as this electron reaches this region and the hole reaches this region, which means if you have a thicker intrinsic region, it takes a longer duration for electrons and holes to travel the semiconductor material and then reach the electrodes. So thicker the intrinsic region, the electrons are going to take a longer time. So the time that is taken by the electrons and holes to travel this distance is what is called as the transit time. So the photo-generated carriers are going to have a larger transit time if you have a thicker intrinsic region. However, if you have a thicker intrinsic region, you can minimize the depletion capacitance, and also you can absorb more light. So you always have a trade-off. So again, for making photodetectors, there are different materials by which you can make photodetectors. So you will see that generally people prefer to use.
Sir?
Yeah.
Sir, this high modulation frequency waves, how are they generated?
High modulation frequency. So high modulation frequency, you mean this one?
Yes, sir. So like these waves, how are they generated?
So this simply means that if you have, so you can just look at this relationship. So C is equal to nu lambda. So if nu is large, if the frequency is larger, that means the wavelength should be smaller. So this simply means that the smaller wavelength signals would be difficult for us to detect. So you know that you have a whenever you are launching signal, if you have a laser or an LED which is emitting light, you know that it's having a smaller wavelength and it's also having a larger wavelength. So this edge of the pulse may not be detected by the photodetector. That's what is meant by high modulation frequencies.
Okay, sir.
Okay, so the photodetectors can be made out of two kinds of materials. Either you can use a direct bandgap material or an indirect bandgap. So generally we prefer direct bandgap. The reason is because the minimum of the conduction band and the maximum of the valence band, they have the same K value, and therefore it's much easier for you to take an electron from valence band to conduction band. So photodetection is all about taking an electron from valence band and taking it into the conduction band, or in other words, you're breaking a covalent bond. The incoming photon breaks the covalent bond of the semiconductor material, creating a free electron in the hole. So that process is more efficient in the case of direct bandgap materials, and therefore we always prefer direct bandgap materials for making photodetectors. But however, in some cases we can even use silicon and germanium as well. Even though they are indirect bandgap, they can be used, however, their responsivities are going to be small. The advantage is that silicon and germanium photodetectors are cheap. The other class of photodetector is what is called, the other class of photodiode is called as avalanche photodiode, which works on the principle of impact ionization. So here again, you have a PN diode. The basic structure is always a PN diode, but you have certain additional layers. But however, in this case, you apply a very strong reverse bias voltage. So therefore, in this depletion region, you have a very large electric field. And suppose if you have an incoming photon, this incoming photon would be absorbed by the material. This would create an electron in the hole. Now, this electron in hole is under the influence of a very large electric field, and therefore, these electrons would accelerate. So you start with one electron. Let's assume that you have a very weak signal. So if you know that the incoming signal is going to be extremely weak, then you can always use avalanche photodiodes, so that it has a very good sensitivity. So this would ensure that even the weakest signal what you receive can be significantly amplified. Amplified in the sense you can multiply the number of electrons. So it does the multiplication of electrons by a process called as, you might have studied about this, avalanche multiplication. Avalanche multiplication. So please refer the third semester semiconductor devices lecture. So you absorb a photon. This creates an electron hole pair. This electron and hole pair is under the influence of a very strong electric field. So because of that, this electron accelerates. So one electron accelerates, it collides with the lattice, and because of the high kinetic energy of the accelerated electron, the lattice also breaks down. So that one electron travels, accelerates, hits a lattice, creates two electrons. Now these two electrons are still under the influence of a strong electric field. So therefore these two electrons would further accelerate, collide with the lattice, and would create four more electrons. So you start with two, it collides, creates two, it again collides, creates four, this goes and collides, creates 8, and this simply multiplies. So this is what is called as avalanche multiplication. So you can again use this process also to detect light. And that kind of diode is what is called as an avalanche photodiode. The other kind of photodiode which is also used in optical communication system is what is called as a metal semiconductor metal photodiode. It's called as a metal semiconductor metal photodiode. Now these photodiodes, they are formed by Schottky junctions. And you know what is a Schottky junction? That's the junction between a semiconductor and a metal. So you are not using a semiconductor junction, rather you're using a planar structure. Using a planar structure like this. So here you have one electrode, and here you have the other electrode. So this is metal, this is also metal. So this metal and this metal forms one junction, this metal forms the other junction. So you can form a junction which is called as a Schottky junction. So the advantage is that this structure is planar in nature and is very simple to fabricate. So this has extremely small dark current. So that means the noise is extremely small. The noise is very low. But one disadvantage is that, see, the light is falling vertically. And the light absorption happens only by semiconductor. Metal does not, even though it absorbs light, it cannot create electrons and holes. It will simply absorb light. But only the semiconductor material can absorb photons and create electrons and holes. So electron hole pair generation is the responsible job of the semiconductor. But unfortunately, since you have metals, you have these metal electrodes on the top, you would see that when photons are falling, when you have light falling on this device, you would see that this metal is going to reflect some of the light. So whatever information signal that is falling on the metal will not be absorbed by the semiconductor. In other words, the photons that are falling on this, the information signal that is falling on this metal is all lost. That information signal is lost. Only the ones which can penetrate and the ones which falls in the semiconductor, only that will be converted into electrons and holes. So that is one drawback of this metal semiconductor metal photodiode. So however, this is also used in some of the optical communication systems. Okay, the last topic to discuss in photo detection is what is called as the noise in photo detectors. So we studied about
Sir?
one noise. Yeah.
Sir, can we combine this metal semiconductor metal with avalanche photodiode?
Can we combine metal semiconductor metal with avalanche photodiodes? I am not sure, but I don't think that is possible because you need to have a very large electric field which can be present only in the case of only in this case. So in this case, what happens is if you apply a very large reverse bias, you can apply moderate reverse bias, but if you apply very large reverse bias, then probably you can have what is called as fringing effects. So you can have some kind of charge transfer between these two metal electrodes. So it may not really function as it may not really function in the way what we want.
Okay, sir.
Okay, so in detection, the noise is very important. So please note, in the case of analog systems, the important figure of merit is the signal to noise ratio. Whereas in the case of digital systems, we directly don't use signal to noise ratio, but we use it in another way, what we call as the bit error rate. That means the number of bits that goes in error per unit time or whatever it is. That is what is called as the bit error rate, which we use for digital systems. So whatever be the case, you always want to minimize the noise. So one noise that is present in the photo detectors is what is called as the short noise. So have you studied about the various noise, the various noise sources or the various types of noises in communication systems? So have you studied about short noise?
No, sir.
Okay. So in the context of optical communication, the origin of short noise is due to the fact that short noise usually happens. It can happen in transmitter also, but however, we are more concerned about the noises that happens in the receiver. Now, the origin of this noise is that you know that the photons that are falling on the photo detector is actually originating from a laser. It's actually originating from an optical source. So optical source, the way in which optical sources emit photons, they usually emit the photon in a random fashion. Though there's always a statistical nature for the emission of photons from the optical source. So you would see that if you have a given time duration, let's say that you have a 1 bit duration, and let's say 1 bit duration is, let's say, 1 microsecond. So 1 into 10 raised to minus 6 seconds. So in 1 into 10 raised to minus 6 seconds, you cannot be really sure how many photons will be emitted by the laser. And what will be the nature? What will be the what will be the nature in which the photons are being emitted by the photo detector? In other words, in a given duration, you cannot really determine the number of photons that can be emitted by an optical source. So in some case, in this time duration, the laser will be emitting more photons. In other case, it might be emitting slightly lesser number of photons. So if you look at the average number of the photons that are being emitted, so the average number, for example, if you look at the average optical power or the current that is being generated by the photo detector, you would see that it's never a constant. It's never a constant line. Rather, it keeps on varying like this in a random fashion. Not really random. If you closely examine the distribution in which the photons are being emitted, you would see that they always follow the Poisson distribution. Poisson distribution. So that's the way in which photons are being emitted by the laser source, and it's the same way in which the photons are falling on the photo detector. So when you have a photo detector that is illuminated, you cannot say that the current is always a constant. So let's say that you are continuously receiving 1 from the laser. It's continuously transmitting 1. The bit is always 1. Let's assume that. So in that case, ideally you would expect that the photocurrent, the current that is generated by the photodiode is a constant. But however, that does not happen. You would see that the current actually fluctuates, and this fluctuation is what is called as the short noise. The other major factor that contributes to the short noise is the dark current. Again, the dark current, so I just discussed before the dark current. You know that even when there is no photons that are falling on the semiconductor, or there is no photon that is falling on the PN diode, you would see that the current is still, you still have some current, you call it as a dark current. So these two are the major noise components that are present in photodetector. The other one, for example, the other one is what is called as the bulk leakage current noise. So bulk leakage current noise means, if you look at a photodetector, you would see that the current, you would assume that the current should always pass inside this material. That means you have a current, let's say the electrons, or you generate an electron hole pair. Let's say that the current should always pass through the external circuit. It should pass through the external circuit. In some cases, what happens is the current actually bypasses this path, and this would actually pass through the surface of the semiconductor material. It passes through the bulk of the semiconductor material, and that noise is called as the bulk leakage noise. This is actually leakage. So you have some current that is flowing through the surface of the device, and that current, which is unwanted, is what is called as the bulk leakage noise. So anyway, these are the various noise figures that happens inside a photodetector. Okay, any questions so far?
No, sir.
Okay. So the next topic, what we want to discuss. So we studied about lasers, or we studied about optical transmitters. We studied about optical fibers. We also studied about optical receivers. However, the next topic, what we want to discuss is what is called as an optical amplifier, or an optical fiber amplifier. So this device is generally used. It's generally not used at the transmitter side or at the receiver side, but mostly this is used in the optical link. Link means the channel that connects the transmitter and the receiver. And this is generally used for overcoming the losses. It's generally used for overcoming the losses. So the various losses that happens are the attenuation loss, the coupling loss, the insertion loss. So all these would result in the loss of optical power. So basically, when the pulse is traveling through, you send a pulse, let's say a nice square pulse, you are sending this through an optical fiber. You would see that because of the various loss mechanisms inside the optical fiber, you would see that the pulse amplitude would decrease. Obviously, you are going to have dispersion also, but for the time being, let us forget about dispersion. Because of losses, the amplitude would be small. So if the amplitude is too small at the receiver side, the receiver will not be able to decide whether it has received a 1 or a 0. And in that case, it's going to make an error. So we want to ensure that by the time pulse travels the optical fiber and reaches the receiver, the optical pulse has sufficient optical power. And to ensure that, we need to incorporate devices that can amplify the optical signals, and those kind of devices are called as optical amplifiers. Now the old scenario is that let's see that you have an optical fiber, you have a transmitter, it passes through an optical fiber, and let's say the receiver is very far from the transmitter. So you know that by the time it reaches this receiver, the pulse would all be lost. So to ensure that the pulse is not lost, we use a device in conventional or in long back. we generally use a device called as a repeater. A repeater is also called as a 3R device. So this repeater, what it does is, this repeater will have a photodiode. It will receive the optical pulse. So this photoreceiver will convert the optical pulse to an electrical signal. Remember, we send in the form of photons. So we receive the photon, converted into electrons and holes, or in other words, we convert it into an electrical signal. This electrical signal is fed to an electronic amplifier. So you have some op-amps or whatever it is. You amplify it. You amplify the signal, and that amplified signal is once again, so let's say that I am receiving a weak signal like this, let's say 1 0, or let's say 1 0 1 0. So this is a very weak signal. I convert this into, this is an optical pulse, this is optical pulse. I convert this into an electrical pulse, 1 0 1 0. Again, this is a weak signal. This is fed to an optical amplifier, and then this amplifies, this electronic amplifier amplifies this weak optical signal. So now I am going to get a strong electrical signal. So this is optical, this is a weak, so this is weak optical, and this is weak electrical. Now this is weak, sorry, this is strong electrical, because I have amplified it using an amplifier, and this one is fed to a laser. That means whenever there is an optical pulse, whenever there is a 1, the laser diode will emit a 1. So therefore here now I am going to get a strong optical pulse. So 1 0 1 0. This is what has been done conventionally. Now the drawback is that you will have to place a repeater at every 20 to 50 kilometers, depending upon the quality of the optical fiber and depending upon the quality of transmitter what you have. You will have to place repeaters at every 20 to 50 kilometers. So which is going to be a costly business. And moreover, these electronic signal, these electronic circuits, all these op-amps and filters and all those digital signal processing circuits, all those things, they are slower. And therefore, the entire system capacity is actually decided by, the entire speed of the system is decided by the speed of these electronic circuits. So the slower one would decide the speed of the entire thing. So remember, if you have a chain, let's say that you have a chain like this. So imagine that, so this is a chain. I want to pull a heavy load. So let's say that all these are very strong. They are all very strong links, but unfortunately, this one is weak. So if this is weak, the strength of the entire chain is actually decided by the weaker member or the weakest member. Similarly, if you have a series of devices that are connected, the entire speed of the entire system is actually decided by the speed of the one which is the slowest. So these electronic circuits are the ones which are very slow, and therefore no matter how fast your laser is or how fast your photodetector is of no use, because these repeaters are slow. And therefore these repeaters would ultimately limit the system capacity. You cannot send high-speed signals. So you would like to overcome this. So you would like to overcome this means I don't want to convert this optical to electrical and electrical back to optical. So here you always have an OEO conversion, and therefore these devices are also called as OEO converters. So O stands for optical, electrical, optical. So optical to electrical and electrical back to optical. So you have this OEO converters. So I want to get rid of this OEO converters, which means I want a device which can directly amplify the optical signal without converting into electrical signal. And those kind of devices are called as optical amplifiers. So how do you construct an optical amplifier? The amplifier is constructed like this. So those kind of amplifiers are called as, in fact, those are optical fibers. They are special class of optical fibers. Those fibers are called as optical fiber amplifiers. So optical fiber amplifiers. So these are special fibers. These are special fibers where inside the core of the optical fiber, you dope it with a material called as erbium or erbium 3+ ions. And therefore, these fiber amplifiers are also called as erbium doped fiber amplifiers, or in short, EDFA. So E stands for erbium doped fiber amplifiers. So they are called as erbium doped fiber amplifiers. So we would see how this fiber amplifier works. Now, if you look at the energy level of erbium, you know that, so in the case of erbium ions or erbium atoms, you know that the erbium atom has a ground level. So let's say that the ground level is E1. It has an excited level, and this excited level is also called as the pump level. So this is the pump level. E3 is the pump level. This is the ground level. And there is an intermediate level between this E1 and E3, which is called as the metastable level, or it's also called as the metastable band. So note that band is nothing but a group of energy levels that are closely spaced. So what happens is, so in this case, so if you look at the characteristics of this erbium atoms, so if you can take an now the energy separation between E3 and E1 corresponds to 980 nanometer. That means if you have a 980 nanometer photon, it can take an electron from E1 and it can take it to E3. So I would call this signal as the pump signal, PUMP, pump. Pump means it's actually pumping the electrons from E1 to E3. So this is called as the pump. This is called as a pump signal. So this pump signal takes electrons from E1, so from E1 to E3. Now, once the electron reaches E3, these electrons, now the lifetime of this level is extremely small. Lifetime is the time duration for which the carriers can survive in a particular level, or the carrier lifetime, or the lifetime. So you take an electron here, that electron, if the lifetime is extremely small, and therefore this electron would quickly come to this metastable level by a non-radiative process. That means it comes here, and from here it comes there. So this excess energy is usually released in the form of phonons, in the form of heat. Now the good thing is that this energy level E2, which is in between E3 and E1, this is what is called as a metastable level, which means the lifetime of these energy levels, or the lifetime of carriers in these energy levels, is very, very long compared to this one. So here the carriers have a long lifetime. That means the carriers can survive there for a much longer duration compared to the time duration for which they stay here. So you have a pump laser, or you have a pump signal. This will quickly take electrons from here and place it there, and it will quickly come here, and those electrons are going to stay there. Now remember what happens in the case of an optical communication link. Now let's assume that the signal what we are using is somewhere around 1550 nanometer. So you have a 1550 nanometer which is passing through an optical fiber, and let's say that, so imagine that this is an optical fiber amplifier. This is an EDFA. This is an optical fiber amplifier, and this is the one which is going to amplify the optical signal, and we are going to see how it is going to amplify. So imagine that the incoming signal is very weak in nature, and this the signal wavelength is, let's say, 1550 nanometer. In fact, this amplifier operates only near 1550. So the signal has a wavelength of 1550 nanometer, and which is, the amplitude is small. So you have an incoming signal, you have a pump signal that has taken all the electrons from here, it has taken there, and all the electrons are here. Let's say all these electrons are here. And these electrons are just staying there. Because they are in metastable level, so they have a large lifetime. They are going to stay there for a longer time. Now let us assume that you have an incoming photon coming. this incoming photon has a wavelength somewhere near to 1550 nanometer. This is an incoming photon. This is an information signal, what you want to amplify, and that signal strength is very small. Now this photon, so you have an incoming photon whose wavelength is 1550 nanometer. Now there is another peculiarity of this erbium atoms. The peculiarity is that the difference between E2 and E1, this difference, this energy separation is equal to the wavelength 1550 nanometer. That means if I calculate what is E2 minus E1, if I calculate what is E2 minus E1, so that is equal to h nu, and that h nu corresponds to the wavelength 1550 nanometer. So you know how to convert 1550 nanometer into energy. You can use this relationship. E is equal to 1.24 divided by lambda. So 1550 nanometer corresponds to somewhere around, it corresponds to somewhere around 0.8 electron volt, 0.8 electron volt. So the energy separation between E2 and E1 is 0.8 electron volt, and the incoming photon, the incoming weak photon also has an energy which is almost equal to 0.8 electron volt. Now when this incoming photon, so when this photon comes, this photon, what it does is, this will trigger this electron to come down. So this incoming photon would trigger this electron to come down because the energy of this electron is equal to the energy of this photon. And therefore, this photon, this weak photon, would cause this electron to come down. So this electron comes down. When this electron comes down, it emits a photon. So remember, I was having only one photon here, so it's very weak. The power is directly proportional to the number of photons. So now the power is, initially the power was small, so it was 1. So this triggered this electron to come down. So now I have one more photon. Now this photon and this photon, they have exactly the same wavelength. And therefore, it becomes 2 photons. So now I am having 2 photons. Now these 2 photons would cause these 2 electrons to come down. So they would cause these 2 electrons to come down. Now I am going to have 4 photons. Now these 4 photons would further cause these electrons also to come down, which means now I have 8 electrons. So now you would see that starting from one photon, which was very weak in nature, this photon had caused all these electrons to de-excite, and now I have generated 8 electrons, which means that I have now achieved amplification. I have achieved amplification without converting it into any electrical signal. So these electrons are actually produced by this pump signal. So this signal you will have to supply. So at the amplifier side, you will have to supply this signal. This you will have to generate. You will have to generate at the amplifier side, and you will have to. So this is called as a pump signal because this is the one which takes the electrons from this level to that level and then further takes it there. So what we are interested is not in this 980 nanometer signal, but what we are interested is in this information signal. We are always interested in the information signal. As a communication engineer, you are always interested in the information signal. You want to amplify that. So by using this signal, which has a larger energy, you are able to amplify this weak 1550 nanometer signal. So this is how the erbium doped fiber amplifier works. So probably you can understand this by using this not this block, probably by using this block diagram. So you have this input signal. This input signal is the information signal. So this is the information signal. So this is the information signal. You have an optical coupler here. So this is a coupler. So this will combine the information signals from the information signal and also the signal from the pump source. So this is 980 nanometer signal. So this will have to be constantly generated by you. So you use the pump signal, and then both these signals are simultaneously fed inside the erbium doped fiber. This is the amplifier. So inside the amplifier, you would see that 980 nanometer. So this is 980 nanometer. The pump signal would take the electron here. The electron will quickly fall to this metastable level. So this is, let's say this is E3, E2 and E1. So you will have large number of electrons there. You will be having population inversion there. So you'll be having large number of electrons, and when this weak information signal comes, that information signal will cause the trigger of this electron to fall back, and therefore it will create additional photons, and therefore you will see that the weak input signal is amplified to a strong output signal. So this is how the erbium doped fiber amplifier works. So what is happening is, you have this 980 nanometer signal which has a higher power, whereas the 1550 nanometer signal is having, this is the information signal, this has a smaller amplitude. But so because of the power exchange, the power is getting exchanged from this signal to the other signal, so that after amplification you would see that 980 becomes weak. Doesn't matter, we are not bothered because there is no information there, but the one which is precious for us is the information signal. So this gets amplified. So that's how erbium doped fiber amplifiers work. So the biggest advantage is that you don't have to convert this into, let's say you don't have to convert the weak optical signal. You don't have to convert the weak optical signal into an electrical signal, then once again amplify that, and then once again transfer. You don't have to do all those magic. You can directly use an optical amplifier, and then you can directly amplify it without converting. And therefore, these kind of devices are extremely popular these days. The drawback is that, unfortunately, these amplifiers usually work only near 1550 nanometer. So not near 1300. Though people are trying hard to create amplifiers, fiber amplifiers operating in 1300, unfortunately, they have not been very successful. So the amplifier works only somewhere near 1550 nanometer. Any questions?
Sir, how do you control the amplification level in this amplifier?
How do you control? Okay, amplification level. You can use an optical attenuator. There is a device called as an optical attenuator, which is nothing but a filter. The other way is the level can be controlled by adjusting the length. The gain is actually proportional to the length of the fiber. So you can adjust the length, and then you can adjust the gain. So usually the gain what you achieve is something of the order of, yeah, this is the gain what you can achieve, 30 to 40 dB. So these kind of amplifiers will be placed at every, let's say, 20 to 50 kilometer. Instead of using a repeater, you can use this. It's because it's optical fiber, coupling is very easy. You don't have to convert this into electrical signal, and once again you don't have to convert it into an optical signal. You don't have to do all those things. You can directly amplify. Yeah, any other questions?
No, sir.
Okay, so yeah, okay, so I think that's all I want to mention in optical fiber amplifiers. Okay, so I think I'll stop here for today. So we'll next see we'll see how we can design an optical communication link, and yeah, okay, so not much. Yeah, okay, any other questions?
No, sir.
Yeah, if no further questions, then we'll stop here. So by the way, when is the next class? Shrijit?
Sir, tomorrow we have we have DL people have another class at 10. So can it be shifted to 9 or something?
No, because morning I have class for optical engineering students, so morning I cannot take any class. So you can find some other time. No, No, not even 11 also, because I'm having class in the morning. You tell some other time. So tomorrow 3 p.m. Yeah, okay. Okay then.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.